I didn't realize my daughter only visited on holidays, until the year she didn't come for Thanksgiving. For a long time, I told myself the pattern was normal. People get older. They get busy. Life fills up with responsibilities, work, and families of their own. Visits become less frequent, and conversations become shorter. That's just the way things go. But when the front porch stayed quiet that Thanksgiving morning, and the driveway remained empty well into the afternoon, I finally admitted something to myself I had been avoiding for years. My daughter wasn't really visiting anymore. She was just coming home for the holidays. My name is Harold, and I'm 73 years old. I live in the same house my daughter grew up in, a small place on a quiet suburban street where most of the neighbors have been around long enough to remember when the trees were shorter and the sidewalks were smoother. The house itself hasn't changed much. The same creaky wooden floors. The same kitchen window that looks out over the backyard. The same hallway where my daughter used to run when she was late for school. Some people say houses are just buildings. But if you live in one long enough, it becomes something more than that. It becomes a collection of moments. My daughter, Laura, was born on a rainy April afternoon more than 40 years ago. I remember standing in the hospital room, staring down at this tiny person wrapped in a blanket, and wondering how someone so small could suddenly become the center of your entire world. Laura was always curious as a child. The kind of kid who asked questions about everything. Why do leaves change color? Why do people grow old? Why do some houses keep their porch lights on all night? She loved sitting at the kitchen table while I made coffee in the mornings, asking questions about things she didn't understand yet. Back then, I never imagined there would come a time when our conversations would feel so far apart. When Laura was young, our house was always full of life. There were school projects scattered across the dining table. Shoes left near the front door. The constant sound of the television or music playing somewhere in the background. Even the backyard had its own kind of energy. Laura used to spend hours out there with her friends, riding bikes or climbing the old maple tree that still stands near the fence. If you had told me then that one day the house would feel so quiet, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But that's the strange thing about raising children. The busy years feel endless while they're happening. And then suddenly, they're over. Laura left for college when she was 18. I remember helping her pack the car with boxes and bags, trying not to show how strange it felt watching her drive away. But she still came home often back then. Sometimes on weekends. Sometimes in the middle of the week if she needed a break from classes. Those visits felt natural. Like the house still belonged to both of us. Even after she graduated and found a job in another city, she continued to visit regularly. At least at first. Every few weeks she would stop by for dinner. We'd sit at the kitchen table talking about work, her friends, and whatever small stories had filled her week. Those evenings were simple. But they mattered. They reminded me that even though Laura had her own life now, our connection hadn't changed. Or at least, that's what I believed. The shift happened slowly. So slowly that I almost didn't notice it. At some point, the visits every few weeks turned into visits once a month. Then every couple of months. Eventually, they settled into a pattern I didn't recognize at first. Laura would come home on major holidays. Thanksgiving. Christmas. Sometimes Easter. The house would suddenly fill with noise again. We'd cook together in the kitchen. She'd tell stories about work and laugh about things that had happened during the year. Those visits were warm and familiar. But they were also brief. A day or two. Then she would pack up her things, hug me goodbye, and the house would return to its quiet routine. At first, I told myself that was enough. After all, she had her own life now. Her own home. Her own responsibilities. Still, there were moments when the silence between holidays felt longer than it used to. I would sometimes walk past her old bedroom and notice how unchanged it remained. The bookshelf still held some of the novels she loved as a teenager. A faded photograph of her high school graduation still hung on the wall. The room looked like a memory waiting patiently for someone to return. Over time, I noticed something else. The phone calls became less frequent too. When Laura did call, the conversations often felt rushed. "Work has been busy," she'd say. "We've been traveling a lot. I'll try to visit soon." Soon, however, had a way of becoming months. And then the holidays would arrive again, bringing another short visit that almost felt like a reunion. The moment everything became clear happened on a quiet afternoon in early autumn. I was sitting on the back porch watching the leaves drift down from the maple tree when my neighbor, Frank, stopped by. Frank lives 2 houses down and has a daughter about the same age as Laura. We talked for a while about ordinary things. The weather. The local news. The way the neighborhood had changed over the years. Eventually the conversation turned to family. Frank mentioned that his daughter had stopped by the previous weekend with her children. "They visit all the time," he said casually. "Sometimes just for lunch." I nodded and smiled. But something about that comment stayed with me after he left. That evening, I sat in the living room thinking about the pattern Laura and I had fallen into. It wasn't that she never visited. She did. Just not very often. And almost always on holidays. For the first time, I said the thought out loud. "My daughter only visits on holidays." The words sounded strange in the quiet room. Not angry. Not bitter. Just true. That realization might have stayed in the back of my mind if not for what happened the following Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving had always been one of Laura's favorite holidays. When she was younger, she loved helping in the kitchen. She would stand beside the counter chopping vegetables while asking questions about the recipes. Even after she moved away, she rarely missed Thanksgiving dinner. But that year was different. A week before the holiday, Laura called. "Dad," she said gently, "I might not make it this year." She explained that she and her husband had plans with his family. They had traveled to see them the previous year, and it was only fair to visit again. I told her I understood. And in many ways I did. Families grow. Relationships expand. Traditions shift. Still, when Thanksgiving morning arrived and the house remained quiet, the absence felt heavier than I expected. The kitchen felt too large. The dining table looked strange with only one place set. I cooked a smaller meal that afternoon and ate it slowly while looking out the window at the empty yard. For the first time in many years, the holiday passed without Laura walking through the front door. Later that evening, she called. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad." We talked for a while about her trip and the dinner she had shared with her husband's family. She sounded happy. And hearing that made me realize something important. Laura hadn't stopped caring about me. Her life had simply grown larger. Larger than the small circle it once revolved around when she was a child. That realization didn't erase the quiet of that Thanksgiving afternoon. But it helped me understand it. These days, Laura still visits occasionally. Sometimes on holidays. Sometimes on random weekends when her schedule allows. The visits are still warm, still filled with conversation and laughter. But I've learned something in these later years of life. Children don't slowly disappear from our lives. Their worlds simply expand beyond the boundaries we once shared with them. And the quiet spaces left behind aren't always signs of distance. Sometimes they're simply reminders of how far the people we love have traveled. The house may feel quieter now. But every time Laura walks through the door, even if it's only once in a while, it reminds me that the connection we built over all those years hasn't disappeared. It has simply changed shape. And perhaps that is the quiet truth every parent eventually learns. Love doesn't always stay close. But it rarely goes away.